2016, and Ubisoft released a game that felt like a glimpse into the future of shooters. A game that wasn't just about pulling the trigger, it was also about survival, trust, betrayal, and the slow collapse of society. And for a brief moment, gamers around the world found themselves inside a cinematic disaster movie, almost living through a frozen apocalypse. But here's the thing, today, barely anyone's playing it. Don't get me wrong, you can still find players in your servers and there's still people to do co-op missions with, but there's no hype and there's no massive revival, just a quiet legacy hidden under the snow. This is the untold story of Tom Clancy's Division, the Ubisoft shooter that was years ahead of its time. And if you played it, you know the feeling I'm about to describe. To understand why the Division was so special, we have to remember where the shooter landscape looked back then. 2016 was the year of fast-paced arena shooters, and battle royales were just starting to emerge. And if you wanted any long-term progression games, you played an MMO or an RPG. But the Division actually tried to do all of it at once. Ubisoft pitched it as a third-person tactical shooter with MMO elements, set in a devastated New York City. It sounded impossible, and honestly, a little bit too ambitious. But the moment that you stepped into the game, you realised this was something different. It was never about sprinting into a lobby and blasting away, at least initially, and every encounter felt deliberate. Every single firefight felt dangerous, and every single victory came with a tangible sense of earning something, whether it was better gear, a new skill mod, or just surviving the night in survival. But the real hook wasn't just the combat. It was the feeling the world generated of being part of a living, breathing city in absolute crisis, where the weather and the time of day and the people around you could completely change your experience. And nowhere was that more true than in the Dark Zone, a place where you never knew if the person next to you was going to save your life or take it. The Division takes place in a New York City that's been devastated by the viral outbreak known as the Green Poison. And that virus spread on Black Friday through contaminated money. Almost a brilliant, chillingly believable setup that hit way harder in hindsight after 2020. And within days, the city fell into chaos. The government activated sleeper agents and ordinary people were living normal lives until they got the call. And that's you, a Division agent, a normal person in doing a normal job who gets the call to save the country. And your job now is to restore order, help the civilians, and uncover the truth about who actually unleashed the virus and why. And Ubisoft didn't just give you a backdrop, they built one of the most atmospheric game worlds ever made. The snowstorms weren't just pretty, they actually changed visibility, muffled sound, and could alter completely the mood of a mission. The day-night cycle wasn't just a visual trick, night brought a different kind of tension, a different kind of feeling. The glow of your watch and on your backpack cut through the dark, but every single shadow still felt a threat. Every single street corner would tell a story, From abandoned evacuation checkpoints to blood-stained hospital hallways, sometimes you'd find an echo. A holographic reconstruction of events that showed you how the city fell apart. These weren't cutscenes or anything like that, they were pieces of the past that you actually uncovered and found yourself. And in between the chaos, there were moments of stillness. Almost sometimes a quiet snowfall, occasional distant barks of a dog, the muffled sound of a radio in an empty apartment. It was never just a shooter. It was a place that you could inhabit. And if you played The Division, tell me in the comments as well whilst you're here, what's the one location in the game that stuck with you? Looking at mechanically, The Division didn't just give you a big map and say, here you go waves, go and shoot stuff. It layered in systems that made every decision matter. Firstly, when you think about the loot and the progression system, every piece of gear had stats. Some boosted your health, others cranked up your weapon damage, and others reduced cooldowns for skills. Weapons weren't just cosmetic, they came with different perks and recoil patterns that you had to master. And then there were the mods, the different attachments and customizations that let you fine-tune everything to your playstyle. This inevitably made build diversity a real thing. In one mission, you could run as a tank with high armor and riot shield. You could focus on skill power to throw out seeker mines and healing stations. Or you could stack absolute crit damage and melt enemies with an SMG. Secondly, you've got the cover-based combat. If you're used to playing like a run-and-gun hero, you'd get shredded. Enemies occasionally flanked. They used suppressing fire, and they did punish bad positioning. In The Division, every firefight felt tactical. You and your squad had to coordinate. One player would draw aggression on one side, with another pushing to a flanking position on the other side, and a third occasionally healing from behind cover. That way your team worked, that way you were tactical, that way you approached a mission in certain ways. And that was what really made the combat what it was. And third, the atmosphere during that combat. The bullets would crack through the cold air and the muzzle flashes would light up in the distance, and weapons sounded heavy and real. Even something as simple as moving between cover had weight. Your agent will vault, slide and crash into walls with believable momentum, trust me. But while the PvE missions were tight, it was the PvP side, specifically the PvPvE chaos of the Dark Zone, that turned The Division into something truly unpredictable. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's talk about the Dark Zone. This was The Division's crown jewel, and its most brutal test. The Dark Zone was a massive quarantined area in the heart of Manhattan, cut off from the rest of the world by towering walls and locked gates. And inside were the toughest enemies in the game, and the best loot. Here's a catch. Any gear you picked up was contaminated. You couldn't just keep it, you had to call in a helicopter, and then survive until it arrived, and then hook your loot up onto the extraction rope. And here's the real twist. Other players could steal it from you. At any moment, the agents you were fighting alongside could just decide to turn rogue. The icons will flash red, and your heart rate instantly spikes when you realise you're the next target. Extraction zones became high-stakes standoffs almost. Do you trust the other squad standing next to you trying to extract? Are they helping fight off the enemies? Or just waiting for the right moment to turn rogue and take your loot? I've seen extractions go from peaceful to absolute chaos in a split second. 1 second everyone's waving at each other, the next gunfire erupts, the rope's been cut, and someone's bolted into an alley with all your loot. And the thing is, you couldn't even be mad, because that unpredictability was the Dark Zone's magic. It was social gameplay without any scripts. You had it all. You had the betrayal, you had the alliances, you had the revenge. And if you actually managed to survive, that extraction chopper taking off felt like the sweetest sound in the world. And let me know as well when you're making a comment under this video, were you actually a rogue agent or were you more of a victim? And be honest, this is a safe space. Mostly. So now I want to touch on why The Division was ahead of its time. Looking back, to me, it's clear. It was way ahead. It pioneered the blend of PvPvE gameplay that would later show up in games like Escape from Tarkov and Hunt Showdown. The loot-driven progression and endgame grind kind of paved the way for Destiny 2's seasonal model as well. Its open-world environmental storytelling is still, in my eyes, a benchmark for Ubisoft games. But here's the problem. In 2016, players didn't quite know how to process it. It launched with bugs, balancing issues, and a bit of a content drought that made some players drop off really early. In the world of live service games in 2016, first impressions were absolutely everything. By the time Ubisoft had fixed the major problems and added some of the best content the game ever had, the hype wave had moved on. Survival released, and it was one of the best modes that I've ever seen included as a DLC or even in a core game. And it was too late. A lot of people did come back to play it, but the hype wave had moved on. And it's a shame really, because that content and the underground content DLCs were incredible. I wish more people would have stuck around to see it. And those of us that did stick around to see it, The Division really did deliver some of the most intense, memorable multiplayer moments in gaming history. And don't forget, one of the most striking things about The Division is how eerily close it came to real-world events. When it launched in 2016, the idea of a virus shutting down a major city felt like pure fiction. Quarantines, panic buy-in, military checkpoints. It was the stuff of thriller movies, not daily life. But just a few years after launch, the world would now see those empty streets, those medical face masks, supply shortages, and the sudden fragility of normal life. The Division's fictional green poison outbreak was extreme, but the way the game portrayed society collapse, scramble for resources, and the thin line between order and chaos hit differently after 2020. And if you don't believe me, test it out for yourself. Nowadays, it's not just a backdrop for your gunfights, it's a reminder of how fast the systems we rely on can break, and how people might respond, for better or for worse. And that's part of the reason why Division's world still feels so relevant. It was incredible back then, but when looking back on after the incident in 2020, it feels even more intense and it feels more real, and I think that takes you into the game even more than it did originally. The immersion at this point is on a different level. And I just wish more players would go back to do this, because I guarantee you, play the campaign and play it all the way through, and I guarantee you will not regret it. And then take a look at survival. Game changer. Now, when you look back at The Division now, does it feel different to you after recent years? Please feel free to include that in your comments. Looking back and reflecting on the legacy of The Division, obviously today The Division 2 still carries the torch, but there's still something unique about that first snowy New York winter. It was never perfect, it was messy and unpredictable, sometimes downright unfair, especially at the beginning. It was also immersive as anything, thrilling, and unlike anything else at the time. And in my eyes, unlike anything else since. For many of us, It wasn't just a shooter. It was a shared survival story. A game that you hopped on with your friends, and the environment and the mechanics and players all combined to create moments you'd never forget. I remember personally logging on after work onto my Xbox with my homies and having an absolute blast, and sometimes just grinding your way through those missions and the sense of relief when you actually manage to complete it. They were just incredible times. And now I think maybe, just maybe, it's time we give it the credit it deserves. With Division 3 on the horizon, hopefully, and in development as we speak, I'm hoping with the return of Julian Geraghty that we take a step back towards the Division 1 sort of feeling and vibe, and we look for that kind of intense survival, clinging on with desperation to a society that had collapsed around us. And I do believe that now, looking back on it, we didn't realise what we had. And like I said, it's time we gave it the flowers. Genuinely. And if you remember The Division, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Check the comments on my TikToks, check the comments in the YouTube channel, and you'll see exactly what I mean. There's plenty of us out there that still think of those days. And if you never played it, especially with the price and the Ubisoft Plus content, maybe it's time you dust off your gear, log back in, and see what's left under the snow. If you enjoyed this bit of a deep dive, make sure you hit that like button so more agents can see this, subscribe for more stories about games that deserve a second look, and make sure you stay safe out there.